Okay, good morning, everyone. We're about 3 minutes late from getting started, and we've got a lot to get going. Let me go ahead and I'm Claire. I'm the Director of Growth and Resource Management. We're going to go ahead and call to order the meeting. Right now, I would like to have Sarah Presley to go ahead and do a roll call of the members. Since this is the first time we're meeting, it would be good if y'all could state your name, just kind of give an idea of what interests you have, anything else like that. Try and keep it short and to the point so that way we do get y'all out of here by noon. Okay, Sarah?
Marianne Connors.
There?
Mic's on?
Now it's on?
Yep.
Got it? Okay, Marianne Connors, retired from the county after 30 years. And my interest in the Volusia Forever program is primarily around water resources and preservation of important properties for that purpose.
Thank you. Steve Crump.
Steve Crump, Volusia County farmer, and my interest would be in ag lands and rural living in Volusia County.
Gerald Fieser.
Gerald Fieser, I guess I'm a retired dairy farmer. We have beef cattle now. I was on Volusia Forever back probably in the early 2000s. Really into, like say, water quality and preserving some of our rural lands for multiple uses.
John Gamble.
Yeah, I spent 37 years, or almost 37 years with the county in mosquito control and public works. My education is forest biology and entomology. I'm a hunter, fisherman, nature photographer. I've been on a lot of the properties, spend a lot of time outside. I have some water resources background also. So I have a wide variety of background.
Jessica Gao.
Jessica Gao, attorney with Cobb Cole Law Firm, Environmental and Land Use Law. I'm excited to preserve the county's natural resources. My journey with Florida Forever started with the Earth Justice Law Firm. I'm actually suing the state of Florida about how they were directing those fundings. So I'm excited to see that journey move forward at a county level.
Derek LaMontagne.
Hi, I'm Derek LaMontagne. Care a lot about the environment. Just grew up in Volusia County. Very much concerned about our wetlands and protecting water quality, as well as just keeping our habitat and corridors intact for nature and the wildlife, as well as for people to use. Thank you.
Derek Orberg is online. Can you unmute yourself, Derek? Not unmuted. Suzanne Schreiber.
Is that it? I'm Suzanne Schreiber. I'm the founder of Dream Green Volusia, and it's an environmental group that works countywide on environmental issues. And I'm just interested in preserving our natural resources for a variety of reasons.
And Wanda Van Dam.
Wanda Van Dam. I built in Volusia County approximately 30 years ago in a very rural area. The idea being I could have my horses and enjoy the wildlife in my backyard. But instead I found that I'm spending an inordinate amount of time trying to keep the area rural. I was fortunate enough to be on the Volusia Forever program when it was retired, and until yesterday I was a member of the PLDRC for I think about 8 years. So my primary interest is in the conservation that
was Derek. I muted him. Go ahead.
conservation of lands for so that we do have rural areas within our county.
Derek, did you want to try that again to join us online?
Unfortunately, we are having some technical difficulties in getting Mr. Orberg, but I'm sure he'll be able to join in. And this is just one of many meetings where we'll all be able to get together and get to know each other. Having said that, let me go ahead and introduce our staff who's here today. This is the group that's going to be working with you as we go through this process. First of all, we have Ginger Adair, who is our Director of Environmental Management. Tim Bailey, who's our Director of Parks and Recreation. Russ Brown, who's going to be he's the Senior Assistant County Attorney and will be overseeing the operation over here. Over here, Ryan Osowski, our Chief Financial Officer. We also have Danielle Dangelman, who is the Land Management Specialist over in Parks and Recreation, oversees the management plans currently for Volusia Forever. Donna Butler, who is our Director of Community Assistance. She, right now, the land management arm of Volusia Forever is under her operations. Nick Dumm, who is our land management manager. He oversees the entire operations out there. Also, Suzanne Conchin, our Deputy County Attorney. Or manager, sorry. She.
And Sarah.
And not forget Sarah Presley, who is our adult supervision and keeps us running on time. And also Doug Weaver, he's not an employee anymore, but he used to be. All right, and so today, the primary point of today is for education. Many of y'all are new to the program. We look forward to giving y'all some history and some background, because what's going to happen is we're going to have a series of listening sessions, and that's where folks are going to come forward and come with a bunch of different ideas and concepts and new ideas to hopefully revise and update this, Volusia Forever 2.0. And so in order to make changes to the program, we believe you have to have a strong foundation on what the program is about and how it's been running. It's been a very successful program. It's done a very good job of securing some of the most important lands in our county for preservation. And right now, what we're going to do today is we're going to have Ginger kind of go over the background after Russ gives y'all his information about government in the sunshine, how we're supposed to be running our rules. Ryan will also be providing some background on the financial aspects of this. And then we're going to be talking about the listening sessions and also something that's kind of come up and kind of interesting in regards to a request from the St. Johns River Water Management District. Thank you all very much. I'm going to get out of the way and let the people who know what they're talking about go. And so first up is Russ.
Morning, committee members. Russ Brown with the County Attorney's Office. I look forward to working and serving with you. I'm going to talk to you about a very exciting topic today. I know you're all looking forward to it. Government in the sunshine and public records. I'm going to try to go through it pretty quickly, but if you have any questions, please stop me. I know it can be kind of a boring or mundane topic, but it is very important so that you know the rules that govern public meetings as well as public records. So see if I can, yep. Nope, am I going the wrong way?
Your notebook, as well as some other background information on all of this. So if he goes fast, you still have
All
the
right,
reference.
there we go. All right, sorry, I was attorney error, was going backwards. All right, so I previously, I think, provided each and every one of you, except I think Ms. Van Dam, I think I need to provide you just a brief overview of the public meetings, as well as some documentation, some question and answers in case you have any questions about certain things you can do. But I think you should have all received that in an email from me. I think I sent it to myself, blank copied you guys. So the Florida Constitution governs public meetings and what's required for all open meetings. I won't bore you with that, but basically all meetings are required to be open to the public, to give the opportunity for the public to comment before any meeting body of a local government takes action. So everything's supposed to be open in the sunshine. We hear that a lot, right? So it's supposed to be open. Very few things can be in the shade. We'll talk about some of those things which really aren't applicable to you as a committee. You're an advisory board, so you actually don't take any final decisions or make any final decisions for the governing body, the county council that's appointed you. You'll be making recommendations on different variety of things to council to take action on. The Florida Constitution, it's codified at Florida Statute 286.011 about the open meetings and noticing of meetings to the public and those types of things. So the staff will be noticing the meetings at a reasonable time to the public so that they can attend and make comments on things that are before you, decisions you're making, what you're going to put on, how you're going to determine whether property should be purchased, the ranking, those types of things, which Ginger and Clay and his staff will get into. So like I mentioned, they must be open to the public, reasonable notice, and minutes must be taken and promptly recorded, which Ms. Presley will be taking. So this is how a meeting occurs, what a gathering is, pretty self-explanatory. The important thing here for you as committee members is anytime there's two members that are convened or gathered, technically that's a meeting, right? So you have to be careful to make sure that you're doing everything in the open and the sunshine. That doesn't mean that you can't attend other types of meetings and participate. Those are some of the examples that are up there. So it's not a violation if, say, 2 commissioners attend public meetings of other city boards or committees and comment on the agenda items that may come before that town commission. If county commissioners who are also board members of a regional planning council take part in those meetings and express their opinions. If council members prepare and articulate individual position statements on the same subject and they send it to other council members, and a city commissioner sends informational material to other commissioners. So as a committee member, just and put yourself in there as council members. It's the same applicability to all of y'all. So if you send an email out to everybody, that's fine. Just don't hit reply all. That's why you saw when I sent you an email, I sent it to myself and I blind copied everybody, kind of to alleviate that ability to hit reply all. It doesn't allow you to do that when you hit the blind copy. So you can send out information, just be careful to not reply. We don't want to cause a violation. That we can remedy a violation. That's not a big deal. We're just trying to make sure that we do everything out in the open in the sunshine. So what are the types of things that are covered? Emails I just mentioned, text messages. There's been examples where committee members or really commissioners or council members have been texting one another, even during an open meeting or afterwards on matters that were before the committee. You can't do that. Everything needs to be in the open. So if you have, when the appropriate time to have discussions about matters before the committee is here, is when a matter is actually brought to you, give the public an opportunity to comment. Telephone conversations can be discussions that are covered, text messages I mentioned, and audible discussions. So if you're talking to one another, whispering to each other, that can also be covered under the sunshine. So those are those types of things. You can call upon staff members for factual information. That's not a problem. Staff can give you information, provide that. Typically what usually happens is if a committee member asks a staff member for additional information, you'll find that we're going to provide that information to everybody. So even though a committee member asked one specific question and you wanted a response, we're going to give that information to everybody when we respond. It just keeps things simpler that way. Staff is not allowed to be a go-between. So if Ms. Gal says, hey, why don't you go and ask, let's say Mr. Gamble is elected chairman. I'm not a soothsayer and this hasn't happened, but let's say, hey, go ask Chairman Gamble to do this. No, sorry, I can't do that because we can't be a liaison in between what is otherwise covered under the sunshine that would violate the sunshine, right? So that all needs to be done in the open. You'll have comment periods to ask for items to be put on the agenda, maybe at the next meeting, or different things you want staff to research, those types of things. But staff can't be a go-between to circumvent the sunshine. There are certain exemptions under the sunshine. I'm not really going to get into that too much. Litigation is one. There's certain meetings about union negotiations that can be done in what we call the shade. Everybody understands what I say when I mean when I say the shade. If it's not in the sunshine, it's in the shade. Make sure you bring your umbrella. It's a bad joke. All right. All right. Bad joke. Yeah. There's plenty of lawyer jokes, but when we tell them, they're not as funny. All right. So notice must be reasonable. Those types of things, pretty self-evident. Not going to bore you, but time, place, and subject are really what the staff has to take care of when we notice a meeting. It's pretty self-evident. I don't really think there's going to be any issues here with those types of things. I think things will be out for the public to come and comment well in advance. Minutes, the workshop is really not an issue for you guys, but we take the minutes and we'll make sure those are published. Today, I believe there's a webinar online that everybody's looking at, and I believe that's being recorded. And then that will be also, posted later for the public if they want to take a look at that, or if you guys want to look back at something. All right, public participation. Oh, I just missed that, public participation. So we're supposed to give a reasonable opportunity to be heard on a proposition before a board or commission. So staff will be working to determine when those public comment periods are going to take place. And generally, if there's if you guys are looking for a certain transaction to propose for the council to move forward with, I would imagine for that certain transaction, there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on that specific transaction. But there will also be, I think, a general opportunity both before or maybe after the board meets. And don't hold me to this, staff will take care of it, and we'll take a look at it from a legal perspective, but an opportunity for the public to comment as a whole for the agenda meetings. There are some certain penalties and sanctions that can be levied upon an individual: fines, sanctions, suspensions, attorney fees, and court costs if the county gets sued for a violation. So this is very important. I don't want to bore anybody to tears, but I also want to make sure that you're aware that this is very important, that we make sure we uphold government the sunshine and that we're doing all those things that we're supposed to be doing. If you have any questions, I'm always available. You can give me a call. You can send me an email, and that becomes a public record if you send the email, right? Every person has a right under the Florida statutes and actually the Florida Constitution, and it's codified in 119 of the Florida statutes, to inspect or copy any public record made by any public official, essentially, right? So any emails you send, any text messages you send, any type of written communication regarding Volusia County Forever business is subject to the public record laws, right? So if somebody makes a public record request, we're going to ask, hey, do you have any records pertaining to X, Y, or Z? This is where it's codified in the Florida statute from the Florida Constitution I just went over. So what's a public record? Letters, papers, maps, books, photographs, films, all those types of things. The Florida Supreme Court has done a very liberal interpretation of what a public record is. There is really no unfinished business exception to the public records law. You can keep notes. So if you like to keep notes as a committee member, that's fine. That note is not necessarily a public record until you show it to somebody or you take some other action, give it to a staff member, those types of things. So if you keep your own public notes, or excuse me, own notes, those are not necessarily public records, okay? So like it says at the last sentence, they can become public records if they're shared with others or filed and stored for future reference. If you keep it to yourself, like I said, the general rule is it's not a public record. These types of things are usually not public records, right? Personal grocery list, pretty self-explanatory. If you have a computer password, those types of things, and unvoted on ballot until it's actually voted upon is not actually a public record. Just some examples for you to share, for you to be aware of. So some things are exempt. For example, social security numbers, bank routing number, certain personal information, like if you're law enforcement, corrections, firefighter, you'll see in the property records, it'll come up as like an exempted 119, exempted as a property holder. It does require, so requests can be either written or verbal. It requires the county to make a prompt response, which is a reasonable amount of time. It's not necessarily clearly defined. It's just that amount of time that's reasonable. Can be made by any person. They don't have to necessarily say who they are. So we've had those as well. And then once the records are collected by staff, the legal department works with staff to review it to see if there's any redacted information. That exempted information I just went over: social security, bank accounts, personal information, those types of things that are redactable. So staff is not required to make a record that doesn't exist, right? So if somebody puts in a public record request that says, I'd like to, provide me an Excel spreadsheet that shows all the grants that you've received on X, Y, and Z since 1995. Well, if that Excel spreadsheet doesn't exist, there's no requirement in the law to create a public record in order to meet that request. What we would do is give you all the grants from 1995 on, and that would be meet the public record requirement. There are charges depending on the amount of time, effort, and documentation that goes into collecting the information that under the statute we can charge an individual requester. So those are some of the things that happens. I'm not going to get into a lot of this. Again, penalties, sanctions, fines, removal from office, attorney's fees, court costs. All right. I just really breezed through a lot of that because I didn't want to bore you to tears with reading all the constitutional statutory information, the exceptions. Do you have any questions on government in the sunshine, public meetings, or public records?
I do have
Yes, Mr.
one
Visor.
question, just for clarification. You said you're not allowed to talk about anything, even in the past. If it was something that happened a year ago on an action, you're still covered under sunshine. You're not to talk
If
about.
it's anything that came before the council or the committee for an action, all those things should be done in the sunshine. So, so it's about, I'm not sure I
Well,
said that.
just after the fact, if the vote was taken, the property was done, and you're in a conversation with something about that parcel of property, about how it went down or what happened.
Among two or more council members, there is a perception that I would just counsel you to be careful what you say. You know, if it's a personal conversation with an individual, okay, that's one thing. If it's among two council members and you're talking about the reason you took action, it's not out in the sunshine, that could be a violation.
Okay, so it is kind of a gray area is what you're saying, and still kind of.
It is somewhat of a gray area. If you're talking to another committee member about an action that was taken, I would say it's a little less gray, and that should all be out in the open. So I would just, if you have any questions or concern, we can talk offline
Okay,
about a
that's
little bit
fine.
more.
Just
Yes, sir. Great question. All right. So I'll move on to, I think there's only one slide. Okay, Robert's Rules of Orders. This is more a slide about sunshine and public. Anyway. All right, Robert's Rules of Orders. Everybody pretty familiar with Robert's Rules of Orders? All right, so later on here in the agenda, because there's not a chair yet or a vice chair, we're going to ask you to vote on that, right? So somebody will make a motion, somebody will second it, and then the matter will be brought for discussion. And at that time, if anybody wants to discuss, you can discuss it before you take your vote. That's generally how it works. If you're making an item, taking an item for action, depending, public comment may come before or right after the second. Just depends on how the chair wants to run it, but it should happen before, if there is any public comment before the committee takes action, is when the public should come up and talk on a specific item. And then a vote, it's a majority. There's 9 members on the board, so 5, right? And in order to convene a meeting, we have to have a majority as well, right? So 5 members of a 9-member board. Everybody gets 1 equal vote, and majority rules. You can make a motion to amend prior to a vote. And there has to be a second to the amendment. And then you have to all vote on whether the amendment passes. And then you would go back to vote on that motion with the amendment as a whole. Does that make sense? Pretty self-explanatory. I think I also provided, or you were provided, a kind of quick sheet of Robert's Rules of Orders and how to run a meeting. I know this a lot of times it comes up in nuanced situations where I'll be happy to help you if certain issues come up as to what a ruling on a procedure or a motion can be at that time. But that's generally how it works. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's just to give decorum, to give procedures, to give everybody an equal voice when they want to talk. You know, the chair will recognize those individuals however you want to do it, however the chair, when they get elected, wants to do it. We have the ability, I think, to recognize somebody up there, up in front of you as a little thing that you can hit for the chair to recognize you, and on their screen it should come up if that's the way we're going to run the meeting. Otherwise, you can kind of raise your hand and request to be recognized by the chair. Does anybody have any questions on the Robert's Rules of Order? I'm sure they're going to come up, but I know that if you don't have any questions right now. Yes. Well, I'll be here for the meetings. All right. The most important thing on here is kind of, we already talked about the sunshine and public rules. Do not talk, text, correspond with fellow board members about any matter that may come before the board for a decision outside the confines of a duly noticed meeting. But really the most important thing is, if you have any doubt, any questions, please contact me. I'm happy to discuss those things with you. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
What are the guidances in terms of social media? What you post online, what you don't post?
I mean, just be aware that You know, just, you're putting it on a public forum, which is fine. Those things, as social media law kind of evolves, right? More and more things are becoming into the domain of the public. It can become public records. I mean, you're already putting it out there anyway, right? Unless you block somebody, which we can, you know, if you're talking about and you're a Forever Committee member and you don't have a separate social media account that is just devoted to Forever Committee members and as an advisory committee, even though you're not necessarily a public elected official, you are an official now, appointed to an advisory board. So you're very limited as to who you can block, especially if you're talking about Forever Committee membership type stuff. So I would encourage you not to do that. But there's nothing that necessarily says that you're prohibited from posting things. Just be careful what you do post. And I would encourage you to just post, if you get a notice for a meeting and Sarah has sent it out, I think it's a great thing as a committee member. If you want to post that to your public page and say, hey, committee members coming up, love to see public participation. Be careful. You can get yourself, I'm not a social media person. In my prior life, I'm retired military and I've seen many careers ruined from social media, and my wife is on there. But I know, you have the direct messaging function and those types of things, which if you engage in that with another committee member, that could be a violation of the Sunshine Rule. So I just would counsel you to act appropriately. I would just post things up there to the public for future meetings or those types of things. Would be very limited on your forum would be my counsel. But if you have some specific questions about what you can and can't do, I'm happy to take those up on.
Actually, I don't use it either, but I was
Yes, ma'am.
curious.
It's a great question. It's with Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and tweeting and whatever, those things are really becoming more and more prevalent as to what you can and can't do, especially as an elected public official. But you are now part of an advisory committee, and things are open in the sunshine for Florida. And so, I think it's a good forum to use to get word out there for the public to attend. And my only caution would be, as a member of the advisory committee, don't stray into where you're talking to another committee member. That would be a violation, or you guys get into a correspondence out in the public, or excuse me, this is not Corona, this is pollen related, so I apologize. And so just make sure you're not doing those types of things. Posting stuff, I think it's great. One-way conversation, putting stuff up there, it's fine. Make sure you don't engage in a conversation with another committee member, either in a public format that's not a noticed public meeting, or two, a direct messaging, or just between the two of you about a matter that could be brought or was brought in front of the committee.
Thank you.
It's a great question. Very good question. All right, so I think I hopefully have not caused anybody to go to sleep. I will turn it over now to, I think, Ms. Adair.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Ginger Adair, Environmental Management Director. Many of you I know, some of you are new faces to me. Thank you so much for your willingness to serve on this committee and spending your time here with us. So as we move forward, I just want to sort of put out a disclaimer. We're going to talk a lot about the current Volusia Forever program. And not because that's how it will be as we go forward necessarily, but because as the members of the committee, I think it's very important that you understand how it has been so that you can then determine, are there areas that we want to improve or change, and as we move forward with the listening sessions, you have a really good background about the program as it exists today so that you can answer those questions or engage in those discussions. So if it sounds like I'm preaching about how the program should be, please, I'm not doing that. I'm just saying how it has been, and I may talk about it in the wrong tense or something as we go along. So
We'll talk a lot about the existing Forever program. Just first, I want to talk about the 2020 referendum. I'm sure you know most of this information, but in November of 2020, of course, the voters were asked to approve the program. That included the ad valorem tax of 1/5 mil for 20 years. That tax is projected to raise $179 million over the program life. The referendum permitted the county to bond in the amount not to exceed $60 million. So bond if we wanted to gather money earlier in the process and have money to acquire property in larger chunks. The purpose, of course, is to finance acquisition and improvement of environmentally sensitive water resource protection, forests and farmlands, and outdoor recreation lands. That was the stated purpose in the ballot question. The forest and farmlands language was new this time as opposed to the previous ballot language. And also new was the requirement for full public disclosure through an annual audit. As you know, the referendum was approved by 75.6% of Volusia County voters, and that's why we're all here today. So I'm going to apologize. There's a lot of information on these slides, but there's a lot of information, so we'll get through it all. So part of that resolution in 2020 that was adopted to put the ballot language out was the creation of an oversight committee, and you are, of course, that committee. It set out some of the policies and procedures for the committee. It set some acquisition priorities and talked about ensuring a balance between public access and recreation and the protection of the lands that we acquire. There on the right-hand side of that screen are a list of acquisition goals. I don't know that we need to read them all, but basically completion of projects begun under prior programs, increasing public use, restoration of habitats, and preservation of aquifers and springs and water resources. So after the ballot initiative passed, the County Council adopted a resolution 2021-11 that established the Volusia Forever Advisory Board. Of course, under the prior program, there was an advisory board, and it was sunset at after we basically spent all of the Forever money, and there wasn't really a need to rank properties. So that resolution established the purpose of the committee, and we are going to spend a little bit of time on that because it's important to know what the role of the committee is moving forward. So this committee is established to oversee the review of the proposed acquisitions and make recommendations to the County Council. And I have some slides later that'll really go through that, how that process has worked in the original program. We'll also talk a little bit later about land management activities, but I wanted to just point out that this committee is really about acquisition and helping the County Council prioritize properties. We do employ a professional land management staff to make all of the decisions about the management of the properties once they're acquired. And Tim Bailey will give you a good overview about what that entails. So this committee will review applications to make sure that requests meet the objectives and criteria of the program as they become established. Periodically review those procedures. The committee will oversee review of acquisitions and improvements for consistency with the intents and goals of the program. Assess the priorities and recommend the ranking of the properties. And also make recommendations about participating in other grant programs, other land acquisition grant programs, and review and assess the land acquisition, water resource protection, forest and farmlands, and outdoor recreation needs of the county. And then recommend further evaluation of properties through resource assessments. So the membership of the board is 2-year terms that expire of March 31st. Of odd numbered years. Of course, everyone here was appointed at the same time as part of the renewal of the program. If any member fails to attend 2 meetings during the calendar year, that seat is deemed vacant and will have to be filled through the County Council. The committee will conduct an annual goal setting workshop to outline the work program for the year and then make an annual report to the council on the accomplishments. And then new for this program will be reviewing the annual program audit reports. Oh, and I will like to say too, as I'm up here giving you all of this information, if you have any questions at any time or you want to stop and have a dialogue about something, just let me know. It doesn't have to just be me speaking the whole time. Okay, so in addition, some restrictions for the advisory committee. So no committee member who is a board member or an employee or a consultant or an advisor or has any kind of contractual relationship with an applicant for funds from the program can vote or participate in consideration of that particular property. A member may not have ownership or any beneficial interest in any property that's considered for acquisition. A person can only serve on 2 Volusia County committees at a time. And then this one is important. Members have to disclose all ownership and beneficial interest in any properties in Volusia County. Members may not solicit offers or engage in contact with any representative of any of the properties that are under consideration in the program. That is important. That role is reserved for the staff. And then members may not represent the program to any other entity like the Water Management District or Florida or any agencies. The resolution also established a code of ethics. It requires at least quarterly meetings that can either be called by the chair of the committee or by the county manager or his designee. We'll do this later in the meeting. We'll elect by majority vote a chair and a vice chair. And the rules say that no member may serve more than 2 consecutive years as either the chair or the vice chair. And then the county manager will assign personnel to support the committee, and that's all of us that you've met here this morning. So I think it's important for you to understand what is the role of the county staff. So our role really is to provide this initial orientation and any continuing education. We are here to create the agenda and help the committee chair with the committee's business. We'll attend meetings and, of course, a non-voting capacity, record attendance, take minutes, those sorts of things. We also will provide technical and administrative assistance. So if at any time you have questions of a technical nature, and that's what we're here for, to help you answer that. We will provide an eligibility evaluation report for any properties that are nominated, and then that would come before you for review. It is the staff's role to communicate with property owners or other acquisition partners or regulatory agencies. The staff will present the committee's recommendations to the county council and to inform the board members of county council actions. One exception to this is, and I have a little slide with where we're going from here, but we will plan a joint forever advisory committee and county council meeting. So that way you will engage directly with the county council at that meeting. That'll happen a little bit later after the listening sessions. But typically this committee doesn't engage directly with the council. Typically the staff takes the committee recommendations forward to the council for consideration. The staff also, of course, negotiates the acquisition contracts, and then we will be organizing and facilitating those public listening sessions that are coming up. Okay, so again, pretty much from here on out, we're talking about how this Forever program worked before. So again, with the understanding that this might not be how it works going forward, but we'll get a good understanding of how it has worked. So currently, as written, the goals are to protect those environmentally sensitive lands, areas necessary for water resource protection and outdoor recreation sites. There is a goal to maximize effectiveness by leveraging funds from other sources. That is one particular, I think, success of the prior program, is that we were very successful leveraging other money. The county may hold title to lands in partnership with other agencies or organizations. We have quite a few existing forever lands that we hold in joint ownership with either a city or the Water Management District or another entity. We may submit purchases for reimbursement from other funding sources. So if forever funds are used to acquire land, that doesn't preclude us from trying to recoup those funds from another source in the future. Acquisition procedures for other programs may be substituted in whole or part for our procedures when other program funds are utilized. And this is particularly true if the Water Management District is the lead partner in an acquisition and they're asking for Volusia Forever to partner on that acquisition, but they're taking the lead. We can substitute their acquisition procedures for ours in that case. We recognize that there are alternatives to fee simple acquisition, for instance, easements, and the prior program was very successful in acquiring conservation easements on a number of acres. That means that that landowner maintains title to the property, but with restrictions that make it valuable as conservation land. The county council has the authority to accept lands that have a less than marketable title if it's in the best interest of the county. This is not something that we do typically. Generally, a actual legal title is required for the property, but that is available as an alternative. And the preference has been to acquire vacant lands. Although acquisition of lands with structures may be considered on a case-by-case basis, but for the current program, we have definitely focused on lands that do not have structures, or certainly don't have like single-family residential structures or something like that. So here is the land nomination and review process. So we'll accept nominations from any entity, conservation organization, corporation, any individual for any land within the county. The committee or the staff may nominate lands, but again, the committee can't have conversations with property owners about that. Lands shall be evaluated on a first come, first served basis. We would typically establish a nomination cycle with deadlines. So basically put out a public call for nominations for properties. There is an application form. It's relatively simple. It's mostly, here, I own this property and here's where it is and what it looks like and why I think it would be valuable for conservation. It's not a complicated grant application per se. Staff performs that initial review based on the established criteria, and we'll talk at length about what those established criteria are, including a site visit. Wanda?
Could you tell me, so what you're saying is that staff can never contact a property owner, the owner always has to contact staff?
No, not necessarily. Staff can contact property owners. In fact, in the prior program, we'll talk a little bit about something called the Volusia Conservation Corridor. That was ranked by the board and the council as a priority for acquisition. And staff did actually reach out to landowners in that corridor and just asked if they were willing sellers. So it can go in that direction. The committee cannot contact property owners and negotiate any, any kind of acquisition terms or anything like that. But staff can. But the main thing is that it is a willing seller. Staff would never, try to compel someone to sell their property. So we would prepare that evaluation report. We would provide that to the property owner for their review, and then that would go to the committee for evaluation. So the priorities for acquisition have been any properties that are on the Water Management District's 5-year acquisition plan. The reason being that the Water Management District has been our primary partner in acquisition. Where there have been partner funds, they often come from the Water Management District. Also, completion of projects that have been begun under previous programs. So we've had a land acquisition program in Volusia County since 1986. So lands that complete some of the projects that were started before have been priorities. Additions to existing conservation lands have been a priority. There's several reasons for that, not the least of which that it's a lot easier to manage something that's adjacent to something you already manage. Properties that enhance corridors and connectivity. A real big part of the Volusia Forever program has been an emphasis on creating these connected corridors throughout the county. Also, properties of significant size to achieve meaningful conservation objectives. So there's a lot of value in very small pieces of property that are protected from development. This program has been primarily focused on properties that have a significant enough size to have that conservation value. Again, partly because of the management issues, partly because we're trying to create that corridor. Properties facing imminent loss to development are priorities for acquisition. And then there are 18 specific criteria, and we'll talk about those specifically. Okay, so site ranking criteria, and I'm going to stop here just for a second because in your book, the page 43 or slide 43 is slightly different. And so the front of your book, I put a replacement because last time I looked at this, I realized it was a little confusing. So the stapled copy has been replaced by the copy in the front of your book, and that's what's here on the screen. So there are 18 primary site ranking criteria, and there are 3 enhancement criteria. In order to be eligible for acquisition, a site must have 10 of the 18 primary criteria. And those are broken down into these 6 different specific areas. We'll talk about each. So the first area of criteria is proximity and connectivity. And so the question is the property functionally adjacent to existing conservation lands or a Volusia Forever eligible property? And second, will the acquisition maintain an ecological link or habitat corridor between 2 or more otherwise unconnected conservation lands? Second grouping is furtherance of acquisition efforts. Will the acquisition further a project begun under a previous program? And based upon that preliminary assessment, is there a reasonable expectation of matching funds from other sources? Yes.
I have a question on both of those.
Okay.
The first one about the previous or existing programs, is there a listing if the committee were to make a nomination? I know the staff would make a report and it would outline it there, but is there any way for us to review what was already begun? I know it's a long history.
Yes, we can certainly do that. And we'll, at the end, I'll show you what we call the A list for the last ranking cycle that we went through, and you can see that. But yes, we can certainly make that available, other projects. And we, of course, have maps of all of the existing conservation lands.
Perfect. And then on the second point, for the matching funds, I think that my concern here is that sometimes these designations or acquisitions come down to a function of timing. And so what level of commitment do we need to show if we're making decisions on where that matching funding is at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So once properties get ranked and they're on the A list and council has approved that, then that gives the staff the authority to go out and negotiate. And at that time, you would look for, are there partners? Or is there an acquisition that's happening at the Water Management District where they're looking for a partner? And so, but you're absolutely right, timing is a tricky bit, right? So oftentimes we'll have a property that we would like to acquire, but there isn't matching funding at the moment, but there's maybe the thought that there will be in a year or 2 years or whatever. And that just kind of goes on hold if that's the case. But because we have the ability to retroactively receive those matching funds, so if there was something that was a super high priority and if we didn't buy it, you know, something was going to happen, we could then be reimbursed. Say the Water Management District was behind us in their, you know, their process, that we could be reimbursed. So we have had acquisitions that have been that way, where the county has gone ahead and purchased a property in anticipation of maybe a grant, like a Florida Communities Trust grant or another partner, and then just get reimbursed. So each one is a little bit different, but timing definitely comes in quite often if there are partners.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, the next set of criteria are related to water resources. And so the questions are, does the property serve an important groundwater recharge function? Does it contain or have frontage on a water body or wetlands or a waterway? Does the property contain springs or other unique features? And does it have the potential for water resource development? And water resource development basically means potable water resources. And then for environmentally sensitive lands, is there the potential that the acquisition will protect or maintain populations of protected species? Does the property contain viable acreages of one or more scarce or unique upland communities? And then does it protect fragile coastal resources? Oh, sure.
I have a lot of questions.
Oh, that's okay.
Going back to the last set, if we could go back one slide. I noticed in the criteria that there's a lot of different areas where it talks about wetland conservation, we have sections on coastal conservation, and we have different items on upland conservation. And so my question is, in the past, have we seen a difficulty in meeting the criteria because there is heavy wetlands, but maybe not the upland criteria, or are we looking for properties that really hit all of those?
Well, certainly properties that hit all of them will rank higher. So in this case, if you had a property that had a mosaic of uplands and wetlands, that would hit 2 of these criteria, maybe not the 3rd for coastal resources. In looking at them, the criteria are pretty balanced. So like I said, if you have this property that has a mosaic, it'll rank really high. If it's just one or the other though, and it has a lot of these other aspects, it generally is still 10 out of the 18. So I don't think we've seen projects get kicked out of the ranking because they were, say, wholly upland properties, or vice versa. It just maybe wouldn't rank, 16 out of 18, maybe it's 11.
Right. Got it.
Ginger.
Oh, John.
It would be really nice, from this criteria standpoint, is if we knew what we currently have in our inventory.
Mhm.
I mean, because, scrub land, things like that, at least to me, and I don't know what the numbers are, but I don't think we have a lot of that land, and that might be a higher priority because we have more flatwoods or we have more other things.
Right.
But yeah, that's one of the things I would be interested in, is to be able to, is this a kind of a low, acreage, situation in the county,
Right.
and maybe we need to focus more on that than stuff we have a lot of already. So,
Okay. Yeah.
but that's,
For each of our properties, we have a management plan that identifies the acreages of habitat type. So that is something that the staff could collate sort of all of those management plans and figure out. I mean, some habitat types are more rare. We clearly have less scrub habitat than we have pine flatwoods because there is less scrub habitat than pine flatwoods, right? So some of that is a function of how much of it exists in the county or still exists that hasn't been developed. But we can come up with a rough sort of grouping of what we own by habitat type. Mr. Kraut?
So this is ranking based on previous committee, correct? So after a listening session, can we change this ranking?
Absolutely. So these are the criteria as they exist today. The thought is that this county is different than it was 20 years ago. Our society is different. The things we worry about are different, right? 20 years ago, we weren't worrying about sea level rise and, groundwater elevation changes. So the idea is that probably these criteria will change based on the priorities of this committee and the folks that we'll hear from at the listening session. So absolutely, I want to let you know what the criteria have been. And truthfully, these haven't been the criteria from the inception of the program. The criteria have changed over time, but this is what exists currently, with the understanding that it probably isn't what will exist by the time we're ready to go in October. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, so one criteria about providing resource-based recreation land. So basically, does the property offer the potential for public use opportunities? Keeping in mind that the Volusia Forever program is intended to allow recreation as a use secondary to the conservation value of the property. So typically the recreation use is very sort of low impact on the property.
I wasn't going to ask this, but then after listening to them, I am going to ask it. Online on the county website, the map of the lands that it's showing purchased,
Okay.
is that accurate? Because there are some very small acreage pieces on there.
Mhm.
And the size came up, and one of the gentlemen up there brought it up as well. So I was just asking if that's accurate.
Yes, it is accurate.
Okay.
Okay, then there are several criteria about management. So whether the size and location of the property are appropriate for cost-effective management, the amount of invasive exotic species, Is the pattern of existing and potential future land use of the area adjacent to the property compatible with typical land management processes? And this is a really important question because as you'll hear from Tim, one of the primary methods of land management that we have in our area because of the ecosystems that we have is prescribed fire. And prescribed fire is extremely difficult to do in a suburban environment. So properties that are surrounded by, development may not score with this point because it's difficult to manage those properties appropriately. There are other methods that Tim will tell you about when fire isn't available, but we do have some properties. Lyonia Preserve is one example where it's completely surrounded by urban and suburban development, and it's extremely difficult to manage that appropriately because that ecosystem relies on fire and the neighbors don't like fire. So that's the reason behind that particular criteria. Obviously, is there appropriate access to the property for management? And then the last two are whether or not the wetlands or water bodies and uplands require significant amount of restoration. And then there are enhancement criteria. And so the resolution currently says you have to meet 10 of the 18 primary criteria. Those are the ones we've talked about. There are these enhancement criteria. And so it is possible that you could be sort of on the bubble about 10 of 18 criteria, but if there's an enhancement criteria, that may make a difference between the committee recommending that property be eligible for acquisition. So does it likely contain historic, archaeological, or cultural resources? Does the property have potential for providing significant opportunities for education or research? And does it substantially further the conservation goals and objectives of the Forever program? So those are just kind of hanging out there for consideration for those properties that may have not have scored super high. Everybody okay so far on that? Okay, so here's sort of the process as it exists right now. So at an open public meeting, the committee shall divide the properties that were submitted for review into two groups. Either they're eligible for further consideration based on those criteria, or they're not eligible. Then, no less than twice a year, the committee will prioritize those properties that were considered eligible into two groups. And group A are the properties that receive the highest priority. And that is because they significantly furthered the goals of the program, or they're eligible for matching funds, or they include a project in any of the Florida Forever project areas. So the committee says these are the group A properties. Those properties are forwarded to the county council with the recommendation of the committee for authorization to proceed with the process. Group B properties are properties that were eligible for acquisition, but they're not the highest priority based on the evaluation criteria. Those properties are not moved forward to the county council for acquisition. They stay on the Group B list. They may move up onto Group A, but they don't move to council for authorization to move forward. Something important to note is the council may move a property from one group to another, but the council does not have the authority to add a property to any of the ranking groups that has not first been determined eligible by this committee. Okay, so then the final acquisition process, did I miss one? No, okay. They're just in different order. So this is sort of just to ground us back to the process, right? This is the little Reader's Digest version. So at the top bubble, the staff solicits willing sellers, and that happens either on an open basis or a call for solicitations. The advisory committee recommends the lands for acquisition. The council then approves the committee recommendations. Staff negotiates purchases, and then the land management staff manages those lands in perpetuity. So that's sort of the very basic framework. So now I need to go back to this one. Okay, so final acquisition process. Group A properties are now eligible to be pursued for acquisition, right? So this is sort of the technical steps to get there. There's a contract with the willing seller, there's a boundary survey and a title survey. There are rules in Florida statutes for written appraisals depending on the price of the property. The staff would hire a firm to do environmental audits, either a phase 1 or phase 2 environmental audit, depending on what's necessary. There's of course the deed, and then the negotiation would go to the county council for final approval, and then there would be the real estate closing. All of that is happening after this committee has recommended the properties to the council.
So my question ties into what you just said, and it's what level of information will the committee have when they're making their priority? So the environmental audits, if the phase 1 and phase 2 come later, that's fine. But do we have preliminary wetland mapping, the cultural resource review, and all of that?
Right. So in that property assessment that you will get would be all of the information that we can get from generally available sources, right? So we would do GIS mapping, we would do a site inspection. So you'll have information about wetlands, uplands, habitat types, invasive exotic species. You'll have information about the property appraiser's assessed value of the property, nothing about any kind of asking price. There would be, of course, the management staff's analysis of the manageability of the property, and anything else that we know without having to hire a consultant to go out and find that information. We won't do that work until after something is ranked on the A list, because we wouldn't expend Volusia Forever funds until we know that that's a priority for acquisition.
Perfect. And then a quick follow-up. As it relates to the Group A list, is that split between our fee simple suggestions and our less than fee simple suggestions?
That's a great question, and I don't actually know. I don't think so.
Okay. And I asked because when one of the notes is access to the property, and so I wanted to see if the county had ever had a Group A property or would have had a Group A property that maybe didn't have access, that could have been given access through a less than fee simple easement on an adjacent property.
Okay, so great question. We have acquired conservation easements, which means they have been on the A list, because they're not acquired unless they're on the A list. So that must be clear in the A list, whether it's an acquisition or an easement, because easements only need to meet 4 of the 18 primary criteria. To the question of access, most of the conservation easements that we have now do not allow public access. Because they're still maintained by the family, they're still farming it, or whatever it is, the activity that they're doing on it now. So they typically do not include public access. There is a requirement for access for the staff to do an annual review of the property to make sure they're meeting the terms of the conservation easement. And so that's done with the property owner. We meet out there and walk the property or whatever, and make sure that all of the easement terms are being met. We don't need access for management, because on a conservation easement, the landowner manages the land according to the agreement, but typically not public access. Did that answer your question?
Okay. Ginger, when it goes for final approval, the county council, is it included the budget changes that land management would need to manage the property?
Okay, no, so that's a really great question,
because,
John.
if you buy it and then you don't have anybody to step up and take care of it, it's kind of hard to.
Couple of things about that. No, the answer is no, but it is part of the consideration. So we will talk about how we finance land management in a minute. Ryan's here to talk about that. Tim will talk a little bit about it. So there currently is a set aside. 10% of the appropriated money every year gets set aside for land management. That is the money available for land management, whether you have 4 properties or 50 properties. Part of these listening sessions will be, is that 10% the appropriate amount? And you'll get some more information about how much that is and all of that in a little bit.
So that number could move.
It could
that 10%
move,
could move to 15.
not over the course of the program necessarily. It will be in the resolution that the council adopts as part of the Forever program. That's not to say that in a future council couldn't amend that. But basically, there will be a discussion about what should that amount be, and that will be set in the resolution, and that's what will be appropriated. It can be changed by council action, but it doesn't move as we acquire a property. It's not like a sliding number. At the moment, it's been 10% that gets moved over into the fund. Now, there are other revenue sources, and I'll let other people talk about those. But land management does look at each potential acquisition for how well that will fit within the budget that they have or won't. And that's why some of the priorities are things adjacent to things that we manage already, because obviously the economy of scale of managing another 1,000 acres next to 3,000 I already manage is different than managing 1,000 acres in an area I'm not already working. So that comes into play, but there is not a specific discussion at each acquisition, at each closing, that this property will take one more FTE. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Because I know it puts them in a spot.
Yeah, you're right.
Ginger, when we talk about meeting criteria, is that a pass-fail assessment?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
The environmental audits, I know with the previous program, the package that we got on each property was very thorough. The staff did an excellent job on that. Is the environmental audit still to be done by staff? And when or if would it ever go to an outside source?
So the initial assessment is done by staff, and that's what you talk about, the packet that you would get. At the time of closing, we would order an environmental assessment, the actual environmental audit, and that is done by another firm. That's done by a consultant, an outside agency. And the phase 1 or phase 2 is really depending on what's happening on that property. So things like properties that have an old cattle vat or something, those would need a phase 2 environmental audit. Something that doesn't have that would just require the phase 1, but that is always an independent audit. Okay, so then we had our little chart. And then one more thing that I wanted to just mention, the existing program has a section that talks about the acquisition of small lots. And so we have in our county a number of areas that have these antiquated platted subdivisions where there are little tiny lots that have no physical access, no roads. They're not even typically big enough to meet any of the criteria for building a home on. And so we have had a program to supplement our efforts by acquiring these very small lots. And so typically, you know, they have like no infrastructure. People have bought them back in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, and you know, they saw an advertisement in the New Jersey newspaper and they bought a piece of Florida paradise, and now they realize that there's nothing they can really do. They're not truly buildable. So the goal was to assemble enough of these contiguous small lots into either ecologically significant tracts, or this is a picture of the area down near Maytown Road, or to acquire enough of them that somebody else isn't going to acquire enough of them to lump them all together and build something in these really sensitive areas. So for the case of the small lot acquisitions, the acquisition procedures are modified. We don't require a survey or appraisal. For most of these, you couldn't get to them to survey them anyway. We do a limited title search and we get an affidavit from the owner that says there's nothing that they know of that's polluting the property. And the transactions are really simple. So we've been very successful in the past on these small lot acquisitions. We've sent a little over $1.6 million of forever funds and acquired over 2,500 acres in these very little bits and pieces.
For the small lot acquisitions, is there any view of like the tax history of the parcel?
Yep, exactly. So the sales price is typically based on what the property appraised assessed value is, which often is very, very low.
Question.
Sure.
Of that 2,500 acres that you have acquired, that's in how much total acres to where you're actually preserving more than 2,500? You're actually preserving
Oh, right.
well
Yeah.
more than that, correct?
Well, I can't, I don't know the answer to that, but yes. So let's say you draw a bubble around the boundary of all of
These subdivisions.
green lots, right? So we're preventing someone from gathering up enough to, so the functional conservation is larger than the 2,500. I don't know the number though. Suzanne, did you have?
What type of
Quite a bit
maintenance is
more.
performed on these?
No maintenance is performed on these. There is no actual physical access to these properties at all. So, and they're typically a quarter acre, I mean, if that. So you can't get there to do anything. Okay, so this is the last one you'll hear from me for a while. back to the idea of the land management set aside. So in the current program, 10% of the appropriated funds were set aside to ensure adequate funding for access, land management improvements for Volusia Forever acquired properties, as well as the 1986 referendum and other lands that were purchased. So up to date, 10% comes off of the top of the appropriated funds, and that's set aside for management of these lands in perpetuity. Now, perpetuity is a really long time, right? So there definitely is a discussion to be had about what is the right number, and I will leave that to Tim and some other folks. But we do expect that this will be a topic of the listening sessions, and so just wanted you to understand how it has worked up till now. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim, unless you have any other questions for me at the moment, and I'll be back in a few minutes.
Not sure if this is a question for you or for Mr. Irvin, or if this is the appropriate time, but I know the ECHO program also has a land acquisition portion. Can you or Mr. Irvin help us understand our priorities versus their priorities when it comes to the acquisition of properties?
Sure. So Donna Butler is probably the right person to answer that because she manages the ECHO program.
Very good question. Typically, when you're purchasing land under the ECHO program, it is for the purpose of very active play space or public access. The difference, you might buy land here and have some public access, but it's much more limited. There's an expectation when you buy land under the ECHO program, even though it might be conservation type, that you are definitely going to have a recreation activity on that property. So it's not just to preserve like Forever is. Does that answer your question?
So the goal of Forever is geared more toward conservation with some public access, where the ECHO program is geared more toward public access and less toward conservation.
I would say that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, good morning, advisory board members. I'm Tim Bailey, Volusia County Parks, Recreation and Culture Director. There's been some great questions. I'm gonna, tackle that question a little bit more in my presentation, and I think I'll also answer your question a little bit more detail. Okay, so let's see here. The next slide in is where we're at currently. So on the right-hand side, you'll see what the previous conservation program or acquisition program has completed to date, and they've done a great job. And Doug Weaver's in the audience, and he's a main contributor of how successful this program has been. So we've got just under 41,000 acres that we currently manage under the Park Recreation and Culture umbrella, lands, the conservation program or land management. And so that team functions under the Parks Recreation umbrella. So, and what do they do? What does land management do? Which is significantly different than your active park, right? It's not ball fields and playgrounds, and it's your conservation. You're preserving your lands that you're acquiring for that particular purpose. So the tasks that are associated with land management are substantially different than the recreation side. So some of the elements that they do here are prescribed fire, which on average, we're burning about 1,000 acres or prescribed fire 1,000 acres per year, which I think is pretty darn good when you're looking at how to well, I agree, when you're looking at all the conditions that need to be done, and completed in order for a prescribed burn to happen. You might have you pull a plan and the conditions aren't right, and so now you got to wait for conditions to be right. So we try to pull as many permits as we can to meet land management requirements, as well as the management plan requirements that are submitted to the state on some of these lands. So I think we do a pretty good job. The other pieces of lands that were activities that we perform, your fire lines, those are created to prohibit wildfires from growing out of control. Invasive removal will also thin overgrown hammocks and timber, right? So there's a lot of different activities that go on throughout all of our lands. Plus, there's washouts, there's culvert repairs, there's fence repairs. All those things go into the activities on a daily basis. In terms of plant and animal monitoring, so Nick Dunham, who is here, who you were introduced to earlier, he's been working with IT. There's a mobile application that all of his staff has now that is able to go out when they're in the field. They're able to GPS coordinate some of the things that they find. Could it be Rogel's pawpaw, and they identify it, and they GPS it. They might see some scrub jay, they might see some other exotic species, and so they're able to track that. They're also able to marry that up with the management activities that they're performing out there, improving the habitat, and then monitoring what kind of species are coming back into the area. So it helps us identify the results of what we're actually performing out there. Once there's another phase of this program, so once we get that moving a little bit here, it'll also be offered to the public. Well, they'll be able to download that application. They're out there, see something unique, they can tag it and submit it, and now we capture that data. Okay, yeah.
On the last slide, it said sustainable forestry, and I hope you could touch on that. Or do we lease out to Volusia County residents to go through the forestry practices and, you know, an idea of how many lands are used for that?
So when we're talking about sustainable forestry, you know, there are some areas that are overgrown, right? And there are some areas that were clear cut before we got there. So what we try to do is we look at what the existing or what the previous conditions were that are current required habitat. So we might plant a longleaf pine in areas that were cleared out. We might thin in other areas where it's too dense, and so to keep that habitat healthy. So you'll see that going throughout the year. We'll have, I think we have 2 or 3 timber jobs currently out right now to thin areas that became overgrown. I want to make one more comment on that though. So we don't timber to make money. We timber to improve the habitat. So when we're looking at, if someone thinks that, hey, we're just looking to, you know, plant these trees so we can chop them down so we can make, that's not the goal. That's not where we're chasing. We don't want to go there. We want to make sure the habitat is healthy. That's how we're managing these lands. So Nick will go out, meet with a contractor. They'll mark the trees in a particular area per acre of what kind of basal area that they want to end up with. And then that's what the contractor goes out and removes. And they've got staff in field to ensure that the contractor isn't overcutting. So, and then we get those monies back, and it helps fund the operations of the conservation land program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tim, question.
Yep.
Are you saying, when you talk about a forest, are you separating that from silviculture where you got rows of trees all the same age, and a forest is, of course, has mixed stand of different species and all kinds of stuff?
That's right. Yep, that's right.
Do you separate that?
That's right. Yep.
Clearly. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the other thing that I want to talk about is recreation access here. So as I mentioned before, this is not ball fields. That's active recreation. This is, to Ginger's point, this is secondary to the conservation and preservation lands that we're acquiring. But the public really wants access too. I mean, they're using their public dollars. They want to be able to enjoy these lands. So we manage that line, you know, where we create horse trails or hiking trails or canoe kayak access for them to access the waterways. So on all of our lands, you'll see maps. I would encourage you to go either onto the Volusia County website or Leone Environmental Center. We have a kind of a conservation lands welcome center, right? So on each one of those lands that you saw on the first slide I presented, there's a map with a trail on an acrylic panel that you can access. It tells you where the parking area is. It tells you how long the trail is. You can make some decisions on if you want to go there or not. They're also included in the Volusia County Parks and Trails app. It's a mobile application, and that'll tell you when you're on a trail where you are on the trail, and it gives you that type of information. So I'd encourage you to get out there, take a look at some of those maps, get out on the lands. You'll get an idea of what we're talking about. So we currently, I want to say when you're looking at all of the conservation lands that we maintain or manage, probably Doris Leap or Spruce Creek Preserve has the most diversity of access. So you have horseback riders, you got mountain bikers, hikers, birders, You also have disc golf course out there, dog walkers. There's access. We have a floating kayak launch that's out there. So that's probably the site that gains the most, visitation year over year. So it's pretty spectacular site. It is a part of our management plan program that we submit to the state. We typically get high marks on marrying the needs of the public as well as the conservation lands that are required to manage. All right. We also have a couple of hunting leases on our properties. Lake George is a wildlife management area. We also have 3 other hunting leases that, let's see, one's on, 2 are on Deep Creek and one's on Longleaf, and we generate money off that. I think it's $9.50 per acre on average. We competitively bid it out. We also have a cattle lease that we manage on Deep Creek, which I think is over 3,000 acres. We also, in terms of ginger staff, there's one person out there that actually goes out there and performs guided tours and educational programs. And if you haven't done it, I would encourage you to get out there. It's a great opportunity. Public usually find it very, pleasant experience getting out there and checking it out. All right, moving on. So, before I leave that slide, so John, to your point, so we track everything that we do on all the lands by task, right? And we have rates. So we know, how many hours of labor it will take to create a mile of a fire line, or how many hours it takes on average to remove invasives. So when we look at acquiring another piece of land, we have the opportunity of looking at what's on that land. What's it going to take from a resource standpoint? How many miles of fire lines are we going to need? How many acres of invasive we're going to have to remove? And having that data, now I can back into what the resources are needed, right, at that particular time, right? So when we're talking about the 10% and the 15, or potentially, there's been some talk in a previous public meeting about maybe raising that, right? That's the kind of data that we'd be looking at of what additional resources would be needed to maintain those lands, right? So if we acquire lands, then my job during the budget process would say we acquired X amount of acres. These are the things that need to take place on this. These are the times and resources that we're going to need. And I back into an FTE and I back into a piece of equipment. That's how I justify what we need on the lands. And that could also justify potentially an increase from 10% to something else.
Question.
So that's after the fact kind of thing. You've acquired the property, and then the next budget cycle you add it.
Yeah, but let me add to that. So during the evaluation process, right, there'll be a part of that evaluation process that identifies the resources that are going to be needed to maintain it on the front end. So when you all see that, you'll also see, hey, what's it going to take? You'll see it going in.
Okay, say we acquired some property that we wanted to restore red cockaded woodpeckers, which we don't have in this county. We have in the next county over, but not here. And that'd be an additional management, dollars that you don't currently do. And
I don't track that.
Well, no, but it'd be interesting to add that to the package and say, okay, we're buying this property. We want to do a restoration. It's going to be additional money to do it. And it's going to go with the cost of the land. Because, I mean, my experience, we build roads in Volusia County, and lots of times the council doesn't give you any more money to take care of that road, and then you got to mow it day one after you accept it. So it always kind of bothered me that when we bought things and we build things, we don't, it's not known how much it's going to cost to take care of them. And I think we kind of do an injustice to the staff by hanging them out. And then when people say, well, you didn't take very good care of that. Well, geez, you didn't add any people, no vehicles, no nothing. And you just had to thin out what you already had. So I'd be, where I'm coming from. I think taking care of stuff is just as important as buying it. So,
well, on the other side, the flip side, on the park side, you know, I've said before where, you know, if we're going to build something new and I'm not given resources to maintain it, what happens is I end up with a lower level of service. And then folks typically don't think you're doing a good job. You're not cleaning restrooms on time. You're not mowing the grass on time. And so, and it's really not the case. I mean, right. So that's really not where we'd be heading here. We'd like to perform at the same level of service that we currently are operating on. I think it's responsible. I would be putting those numbers together to solicit the additional FTEs and/or equipment necessary. Now, I want to make one more statement on that. So that I'm cautioning that on the front end when we include that in our evaluation for each parcel. I don't want to really get down into the weeds of those. It really should be focusing on the benefits of the 18 criteria that you got up there. Focus on those. We start focus on the little bitty stuff, we're going to probably get in a quagmire. So I'd really like to focus on the main mission of the Forever program. And I'll worry about the maintenance.
When you talk about, excuse me, maintenance of these properties, fire burning, prescribed, all that, do we contract out? Do we ever try to do any partnerships with the state forestry or St. John's to do any of the management where we're not creating 3 sets of,
yeah,
you know,
so whenever we
equipment?
do, you know, if we all partner together, Division of Forestry, Fire Services, Parks or Land Management, we kind of let everybody know what we're burning, you know, and then if we can solicit help, we help them sometimes, they help us sometimes. So we do have a partnership with kind of work with everybody on that. Which reminds me of one more topic. So Lyonia is one of those areas that's tough to burn. And there was an article in a news journal probably a year and a half ago about the prescribed burn history of Lyonia. So, you know, you've got the library, you've got 2 schools, you got 2 a middle school and an elementary school. You got Daytona State College, and you got the City of Deltona administration building in close proximity, as well as all of the homes that are nearby. So that particular site is very complicated to try to prescribe burn. So when we do that, it's all hands on deck. We tack on other agencies to help us when we're doing that, and it's usually a micro burn, like an acre, right? It's not something that you can't go in and burn 100 acres. You know, you just at that particular site, you can't do that. So that one is high maintenance, all hands on deck when you're doing a prescribed burn. You could mechanically chop, but that's not the best, you know, outcome for the environment at that particular location. But it's plan B. So if we can't burn, we mechanically chop, reduce the fuel. The better option is burn, but it's little pieces at a time.
Partner with another agency, particularly the Water Management District. Oftentimes they'll do the management if it's adjacent to something that they already own. So we own things that they manage, they own things that we manage. It's just sort of a side-by-side.
That's it for me. Any other questions?
Good morning, committee members. I'm Ryan Osowski. I'm the county's chief financial officer, and I have a couple slides to go over with the financial impacts of this program. First thing is, based on the current property values, next year we project the 0.2 mils will result in $7.65 million for this program. Back when we were tasked with providing information to council about putting this on the ballot, we ran linear models, exponential models, 10 years of history, 20 years of history. What is the appropriate amount of history that's going to emulate the future? And we landed on a center model, which was 20 years of history at an exponential regression, which landed at about a 2.6% increase in property values over the next 20 years. Using that model, the estimate is the $179 million over 20 years. The current program is, for the last 20 years, collected a little over $100 million. The current forever balances in the fund for the year 2000 program are 726,000 reserved for acquisition and 12.7 million reserved for land management. Right now, in the 2021 budget, we are spending approximately budgeted to spend approximately $1.2 million a year out of the Forever program for land management. Part of that is spending down that land management reserve, because as you'll see at the bottom, 10% of 7.65 million is 765,000. Skipping back up to the list of funds that are available, not only is the set aside available for land management, but the hunting leases, the timber sales, the cattle leases, those are available. Interest, of course, on the fund balance is available, but it's not a very good time to be asking for interest when the short-term rates set by the Fed are a little over 0%, statistically zero. And then, of course, we've got the Forever 2000 fund balance that would be potentially available for land management. And I say potentially because right now that 12.75 is set aside for land management, but there is discretion with the council. It is their budget. Those numbers could be moved around. Like I said, 10% of 7.65 million leaves you with 765, which would, the 90% remaining would be 6.9 million a year for acquisition. The potential discussion during the meetings that council had before this was put on the ballot was, well, what if land management was 15%? Well, you see the numbers for the 15%. Those numbers would, of course, be added to hunting leases and timber sales, as well as the fund balance that we have going forward. Skipping on to the financing piece of this, the bonding authority that was approved by the voters was $60 million. That's what's considered a limited general obligation bonding authority. Anytime you issue a general obligation bond, which is a separate levy that has to be done in order to satisfy those bonds, it has to be approved by the voters. That's not the only source of debt that the county has access to, though. There's also special revenue bonds. Commercial paper is something that we did in the past. Generally, we prefer to just do a revenue note at this point with private banks and place that revenue note. But those would be in addition to the $60 million. So if we were looking to do a smaller deal and we didn't want to levy didn't want to utilize the $60 million general obligation bond authority, we could look at doing a smaller debt issuance tied specifically with that's not a general obligation authority. Of course, when you do a general obligation, because it is the up to the 0.2 mils, the full faith and credit of the county, it's the highest credit rating. Highest credit rating equals the lowest interest rate. So if you do these other financing vehicles, the interest rate will be a little bit higher because you don't have the full faith and credit of the government. You only have what you pledge, the revenue source that you pledge. Then I do want to cover how we got to the 60 million, just for a little bit of history lesson. Because 179 million of potential revenues and 60 million of bonding authority, that's quite a difference. But it was not done in a vacuum. It was done in consultation with our financial advisors. When the market, real estate market tanked in 2009, people that are banks or investment firms that were tied to limited obligation, general obligation bonds learned a lesson that there needs to be a cushion there. They don't want to say, we project 179 million. We'll let you take out 179 million. Well, what if we don't collect 179 million? They actually limit it to a coverage ratio of 1.5. So if our annual annual proceeds that we're collecting are 7.65 million, previously they were a little lower than that. We've grown a little bit. They would only allow you to do 2/3 of that, so you have the 1.5 coverage ratio. So based off of that, the annual debt service at 3.4% for 20-year life would be about 4.2 million. If we went any higher to like 70 million or 80 million, we were going to exceed that coverage ratio. So that's how we landed on 60 million. Like I said, we do have the other mechanisms besides the general obligation. If that was a financing vehicle that council wanted to pursue, this is not the only way we could accomplish that. It's been said in the past that we want to have the money available so that we can go make purchases. I caution that because of this federal regulation that I've quoted word for word, because the debt is tax exempt. The Treasury, the federal Treasury, does not look favorably upon that if you do not have a plan for spending that money. Because every time you issue tax exempt debt, it alters the market in their view. And that's why they've got this quote here about it overburdening the marketplace. We have to make certifications that we're going to spend all that money within 3 years. So we can't just take out $60 million and say, now we've got the money. So basically, the federal government would say in their regulations, don't take out debt until you actually need it. Keeping in mind, in combination with that, if property is recommended and we need to cash flow that property, we can do that. It's only about a 3-month time frame, depending on whether we privately place the debt, which would be smaller debt issuance that a bank would just loan to us, basically. If we did a public issuance where people actually purchased our bonds and there was an underwriter involved, that'll take a little more on the longer side, maybe 4 months. So 2 to 4 months, depending on how you structure it. I'd average it out to 3 months. And we have, like I said, we have the intermediate cash flow. So needing to take out 60 million so you can say we have 60 million is not something we need to do. If we line up $60 million worth of properties, we can cash flow those and take out the debt and refund ourselves for that purchase. In addition, the land management fund balance that's available right now, that $12 million, that's also a cash flow mechanism. We've got that money while it's reserved for land management right now. And like I said, council could change that. We could at least borrow from that $12 million to make any intermediate purchases that we need to make. And there's other cash flow that the county has where we could make those purchases. So cash flow is not the biggest concern that we have. If properties are identified and council wants to make those purchases and staff is recommending to make those purchases, we have financing mechanisms and the cash flow to make that happen. We don't need to worry about take out the debt so that we are in a stronger position. We have the position that we need to make these purchases. Yes.
Online under the Volusia Forever page, there's kind of the fiscal summary of the program's history. So if we have the bonding authority for 60 million, are we carrying over any debt from the other program, or do we have that full 60 available?
The 60 million is a new bonding authority. It does not relate to the previous 40 million. In fact, this year will be the final debt payment on the on the Forever 2000 program.
Yeah. Ryan, question. The land management folks have been 100% out of the funds. We haven't used the general fund to fund the land management part of it. I know Tim uses that in Parks and Rec, but
in fiscal year 2021, in response to some of the comments that council had made, we actually started funding land management almost entirely. There's still some pieces of it that are in the general fund. Previously, it was about a 50-50 split. The general fund picked up half of land management, so 600,000 in the Forever Fund. I believe, but I don't have it off the top of my head, I believe there was 2 FTEs that are still left behind in the general fund. Yeah.
Okay, so it's been a split.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're closer to 100% than we've ever been, but we're still not quite at 100%.
Okay.
So there's additional land management costs beyond the 1.2 million that's budgeted in Forever right now. For the last 19 years before this, it was 50% or less that was coming out of the Forever program. Yeah. Any other questions about the financial capacity of this program? All right, I believe Ginger's coming back up.
Okay, you didn't want to hear all that from me, believe me. Okay, so next on our agenda here today, just a little bit of discussion about the listening sessions. So here is the schedule for the listening sessions. There's one in each council district. They will be considered meetings of this committee, so we will need a quorum of committee members. So we're obviously really hoping that you all are available. They're scheduled for 6 to 8 p.m. in the evening so that we can maximize the number of folks that can come and hear the presentation and participate. The meetings will be both in person and there will be a virtual option. We will be pre-recording our presentation. It'll be something like this one, although a lot less in depth on some topics. Certainly we don't need to talk about the sunshine. So that will be pre-recorded. We'll have an introduction. We'll play that recording in person at the meeting. Folks who are on the online presentation will hear the same. It'll also be available on our website, so folks who can't attend any of these meetings can watch the presentation and provide their comments that way. Those are the topics that we're going to talk about, much of what we talked about here this morning without some of the procedural things. Sarah, have you or will you send appointments to the committee members?
I will be sending appointments out to each of them. And I was also going to send a doodle poll to everyone for all 5 to make sure we're going to have a quorum at each meeting. So you should be receiving that at the beginning of next week.
Any questions or comments on the listening sessions? Okay, so this is just sort of a summation of the process and where we are. So creating an advisory committee, that's been done. We're here at the education and orientation session for the committee. Still to come will be those listening sessions. They start on April 21st, they end on May 19th. The staff will take the information from those listening sessions, collate that information, draft some recommendations is probably not the right word. We'll collect that information. And then we will have a meeting with this committee to discuss what came out of those listening sessions and for you all to put together your list of recommendations for criteria, process, whatever comes out of that. There will be in July a joint workshop between this committee and the county council. So that will be your opportunity to communicate directly with them. Then based on that joint committee meeting, we'll work toward, legal will draft the resolutions that set forth all of the program criteria. And that actually will go back to the council for adoption and then be ready in October for implementation of the new program at the same time that we start to have that revenue in the 2022 budget year. Sound okay? Okay, so we have 2 more items. We have the selection of the chair and the vice chair, and then I have a really quick discussion of a request that we've received from the Water Management District. So I guess we accept nominations for the chair and vice chair positions, and then you all vote on those, and then we will have someone up there actually in charge. Okay, so yeah, you go.
If so, somebody want to make a motion for a nomination for chair?
Nominate Gerald Feaser.
I'd like to nominate Mary Ann Connors.
I'll second that nomination.
Which one are you seconding? So Mary Ann Connors has been nominated, and there's been a second. Any additional?
I think I like the experience Mary Ann would present.
Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Ms. Connors, you are the new chair. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I guess we have one item of business. We have a vice chair we need to select. So nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Suzanne Schreiber.
I'd like to nominate Wanda, if I could.
I have a question. Is Mr. Orberg still online?
Yes, I'm joining right now with, I unmuted myself, so I would second Suzanne Schreiber.
Mr. Orberg, this is Russ Brown, Assistant County Attorney. I know we'd had some correspondence, and the reason for your absence, as we had talked about, I wasn't aware, we'd provided some advice that while you can listen in, unless it's due to extraordinary circumstances,
Okay.
those issues that we had talked
Right.
about, you're unable to actually participate, which means to vote for items.
Okay.
So unless I don't understand the reason for
I
your,
understand.
okay. So we do not have a second for, I'm sorry, whoever he said, I don't remember who he said, Ms. Schreiber. So he's unable to participate because his absence is not under extraordinary circumstances. He would have to be here physically.
I understand. I was also going to ask the question that you just kind of answered moving forward, that we all have to be present in order to vote. And is that the case?
So yes, ma'am, generally that's correct. There is very limited circumstance where a member could participate virtually by phone or webinar under extraordinary circumstances. And those are technically because of something unforeseen, a medical, family issue, those types of things. And then the board would take up that issue and could vote and say, we do find that, in this case, Mr. Orberg is absent due to unforeseen extraordinary circumstances, and therefore he or she could participate by phone. My understanding, Mr. Orberg's absence is not due to that extraordinary circumstance in this case. And so while he can listen and participate in that manner, he can't participate as it applies to voting on those matters right now. So yes, ma'am. And as we all are aware, we're still under a pandemic, but the governor has lifted the virtual attendance in order to be able to have a quorum meet virtually. So there has to be a quorum physically present first. And then if a quorum is physically present and a member is unable to appear physically and due to extraordinary circumstances, they could participate once a physical quorum is present. Does that make sense? Okay.
Russ, question
Yes,
on
sir.
that. Does that count as an absence from the meeting if you're listening remotely?
Yes, it does. Because
Okay.
if he was able to participate due to extraordinary circumstances, medical, those types of things I talked about, that would not be an absence. But because
Okay,
that's not apply here, that is technically an absence.
So the listening sessions, if somebody misses 2 of those, then they're out? Is it, or they have to go back to the council? I mean, because they said that was a committee meeting. So it's.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, it's getting crazy here. We're stacking a lot of stuff in and people have other things. So,
That's why we're sending out the doodle poll.
Yeah.
Because if we run into a situation where lots of people can't attend those listening sessions, then presumably we can try to find other ones. We've reserved the rooms and those sorts of things. We haven't published those dates to the public yet because we wanted to make sure of that.
But that's a great question. Let me go back, make sure, because we can always, there's some things we could do potentially. But let me take that.
I know in July, I'm not in this county. So,
Yes, sir. That's a great question.
I would have the ability to access any kind of meeting,
Yeah.
remotely, but I won't be here. So.
That's a great question. Let me look into that a little bit. We'll talk about it among the staff and take that into consideration because I know that's something we don't want to do.
Yeah.
Great point. But for right now, Mr. Orberg is unable to participate for the vote. Now I lost track. I don't know if we had a second.
No, I would
two
like to
motions and no
second
second.
Wanda's nomination.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for Wanda.
And just for the record, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but just for the record, who made the motion initially? And then who seconded it?
Mr. Feaser?
Okay.
Can the chair make a motion?
Well, so that brings up a good point. Typically, a chair can't make a motion unless they pass the gavel to the vice chair, and then you can make a motion. There was no vice chair at this point.
Correct.
So,
Madam Chairman, if you would withdraw your motion, I would like to move that we elect Wanda as vice chair.
I'll second that.
My motion's withdrawn. Mr. Feaser's motion is on the floor.
And Ms. Gal just seconded it.
Did- Any other nominations from the floor? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So with that, that's our last official business. Ginger, further instructions?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So wanted to bring up an issue that has come to our attention here recently. The Water Management District has approached the county. They are in negotiation for property that is adjacent to one of the properties that they own in the south part of the county off Osteen Maytown Road. This is actually 3 parcels owned by 3 family members. The southern 2 parcels are the proposal is to buy those as fee simple acquisitions. The northern parcel, the seller is interested in a conservation easement. The Water Management District is extremely interested in acquiring these properties. It's, like I said, directly adjacent to their land that they already manage. And they have reached out to see if Volusia Forever can partner with them. These properties are within the green boundary that you see on the screen is the Volusia Conservation Corridor. The Volusia Conservation Corridor in its entirety is on the A list for priority acquisition that was approved by a prior Volusia Forever committee and by the county council. And so staff, if this had come up 6 months ago, a year ago, the staff would have the authority to move forward on partnering on this acquisition because it's already on the A list and that list is still active. But because it's happening at a time when we're in transition, we wanted to bring this to the attention of the committee and see if it was something that you wanted to have additional discussion about in terms of how it meets the criteria as they exist now. Like I said, it is in fact on the A list for acquisition, but you know, we're in a period where we're looking for you know, advice on how to move forward. And so we didn't want to unilaterally move forward with something and have there be any question about whether or not this committee was in favor of that. So we don't have to take action on this today. I just wanted to bring it to your attention, maybe have some discussion about how to move forward.
Any thoughts on proceeding?
Yeah, I think we have a process. We need to adhere to the process, and we don't need to, you know, have someone come in and say, oh, I got this great deal, let's jump right on it. Let's adhere to the historical process until we have new rules and where we have an opportunity as a board to assess and review it like everything else, would be my opinion.
I understand that thinking, but also given the fact that this is in the conservation corridor and was one of our top priorities, I would at least like to hear some more about it. So, I mean, like you say, we don't need to necessarily take action, but I would like to hear more about it at some point.
Can you just tell me again what the acreage is for this area?
The properties combined are roughly 1,230 acres. The southern 2 parcels that would be fee simple are something 836, I believe. The northern part is somewhat less. They are, again, you know, currently on the A list, so they've been prioritized for acquisition. They're in extremely good condition, surprisingly so. There has been some history of timber operations on the property. There's some thinning that would be likely. This property would be managed entirely by the Water Management District. This is not something that the county would manage, even if we partner in the acquisition. There is very few invasive exotics on the property. The northern corner is adjacent to the headwaters of Deep Creek, and the property is a pretty much a mosaic of wetlands and uplands. The district is planning on moving forward. They have requested our participation because, like us in our prior program, projects that have a partner are ranked higher and certainly are seen by their governing board as a higher priority. But the district is planning to move forward. Right, they would maintain the property.
So this property has already gone through the process that we went over today.
Well, yes. So, but let me be really clear that these particular parcels were not analyzed individually. But Sarah, would you put the A list up on the screen? So in the criteria that currently exist, any properties in the Volusia Conservation Corridor are considered Group A. And so this is, we slide it down just a tiny bit so we can see the top. So this is the 2009 first cycle. This was the last actual ranking cycle before the Volusia Forever Advisory Committee was sunset. And you can see the very first item on Group A is Volusia Conservation Corridor. And so what that means is any parcel within the corridor that becomes available for purchase is automatically on the A list. This was, of course, through the committee and then approved by the county council, which up until we started this new process would have meant this would come from the district and staff would say, absolutely, this is on our A list. We want to move forward and negotiate. But because we're here in this transition, we wanted to talk to everybody and get some feedback.
And what is the Water Management District's timing? I know we just went over our general plan for the next few months.
Right.
And it seems like we won't be prioritizing until November. So that's a
great question. The Water Management District intends to try to close on this property in the current fiscal year. They have some money from DEP that it's a sort of use it or lose it situation that they have. And so their intent is to purchase this before the end of this fiscal year. So Danielle was just reminding me that the Volusia Conservation Corridor is a priority of Florida Forever as well.
You know, Ginger, I've been on the adjoining property, Palm Bluff, a lot. And they bought that. And at one point they were trying to do a big stormwater project, build a big wetland and everything to take some of the nutrients out. And actually the nutrient exceedances south of there. So it really wouldn't have helped too much. But I would want to know what they plan to do with the property before, because if they've got another bogus project lined up like they did the last time, I wouldn't be in favor of even helping them one bit. So because that's beautiful. It's floodplain down through there. I agree that it should be, it should be protected, but I'm always kind of crazy with St. John's because somebody comes up with some wild ideas up there. So it's.
We're not asking for y'all to jump on this right now. We understand that it's coming to you and at your first meeting where you're just getting your feet wet. It's not fair to necessarily ask that of you. We do see this as something that could be, first of all, used as a learning tool. And if the board would so indulge your staff, if we could schedule a meeting next month, because that will be within the time frame that St. John's is looking to try and get some sort of commitment from us. And we can provide to you the same type of report that we would be doing anyway. So therefore your staff would go out, do the evaluation, bring it to you, let you see what's going on with it, be able to possibly have some representatives from St. John's here to be able to answer the questions that Mr. Gamble brought up, and rightfully so. So then that way this board can basically get its feet wet before it starts going into the listening sessions with how we actually have been performing this over the last 20 years. If that's something that the board is willing to do, we'll make that happen.
Clay, Mr. Irvin, are you asking us to make a decision on this in the month of April? Is that what you're?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I would rather wait for procedure for the meetings. I think that's what the public has asked of us, and that's what the council expects is for procedure. Okay.
We understand that, and the reason why we're, first of all, the procedures have not ended. The procedures that are still on the book are still the procedures that are on the book. The deadline for us to make a commitment to the Water Management District is not going to be in time for us to have the procedures updated or completed.
What is that deadline, may I ask?
They're looking to try and do a closing in August.
Okay, so the last meeting is May 19th. We can't, I would prefer to wait for procedure.
The procedures here will not be adopted until after.
I would prefer to wait for public listening session procedure.
Okay. Clay, I would like the briefing. It actually, I like the idea of having an exercise. I think it's an opportunity to try something out, and before there's a lot of other things to consider and process to consider. I'm open to the possibility of having a meeting in a month. It will give us a chance to look and anticipate and learn something about how this process is working before we move to the next iteration.
We're your staff. Whatever y'all decide to do, we will do.
And you said this has been approved. This is approved general heading of conservation corridor by the county council. And we're being asked for money only.
I believe listening and going through the motions of listening are different than actually voting using taxpayer funds. And the taxpayers are going to be speaking at the listening sessions. That's why I prefer the
Understood.
I have a question too. When you say we're going to partner, and I know we've done a lot of partnering with St. John's, but sometimes partnerships, you do all the work, sometimes they do a lot of work. When you say partnership with them on this particular deal, what are they proposing?
Basically, it's, there's not been a specific amount of money identified, but they have identified that they would be the ones doing the management once the acquisition occurred. So we would not have any management requirements nor commitments towards
Who's
funding.
paying the bulk of this thing? They are? Well, that's what we need to, I mean, that's hard to make any kind of say yay or nay until you have something concrete proposal in my mind too, so.
Will we know that in a month?
We'll know in a month what the district is offering for the property. They have not specifically asked how much the county would be willing to partner through Volusia Forever. And while that is definitely something to be thinking about, I want to remind everybody that the role of the committee is to decide if a property is eligible for acquisition, not to be in the negotiation for the acquisition. So the role of the committee is to say, yes, this meets the criteria as they are written. And then the negotiation with the partner is the role of the staff and the county council.
So therefore, you would be wanting us to make a decision on the criteria in the month of April, correct?
Well, we want to do what you want to do. What we're proposing is that under the current rules, this has gone through the process and is ranked as eligible for acquisition. And we want to make sure that we're all comfortable that we're not going forward in a way that is not appropriate to the committee as it sits right now. Like I said, if this had happened 6 months ago, there wouldn't be a question. This has been through the existing process and the council has deemed it eligible. We just wanted to bring it forward and, to be overly sharing, I guess.
This, Ginger, am I correct then? What you're saying is this has been through the process. There has been an advisory position on it. There has been a county council action, and basically what you're suggesting is this is a courtesy.
Yes, ma'am. This has been through the entire process, through the county council, and is on the current priority acquisition list.
So how do we make a decision on something if the criteria has not been decided for the new? That's my question, because we're essentially, if we make a decision on that based on previous criteria, am I missing something here? Because the criteria hasn't been established for the new, correct?
Because the criteria that have been established are still in effect until new ones are adopted.
Right. It has met the criteria in existence today.
There's one point that I would like to make on this. We do have $729,000 that is available from the prior program. So if you view it as two groups, this would be from the prior program with the prior procedures. Potentially, that could be a way to look at it.
Ms. Connors, my initial impact is with Ms. Shriver, but after thinking about it and listening to the discussion, I don't see why we wouldn't let staff consider going forward with it. Let's let them research it, see if it fits the criteria. We don't have to make a decision today, yes or no. That's going to be in the future. So why would we not learn the information so we can make a good decision? And I don't see any problem why we couldn't work with the existing rules as they are.
I just want to make sure that those rules are not accepted as the new automatically, because if there were a vote to happen, I don't accept the current rules and criteria as going forward. I'm just making that clear.
I think that's understood. Thank you, Susan. Any further comment?
Just for clarity, if we do hold the special meeting, which I'm in favor of, will we have, I know this is generally designated as the priority A, will we have some partial specific information beyond that for discussion?
Yes, we would provide the full report that we would provide any other property that came forward for acquisition.
It just seems if nothing else, this would give us a chance to look at what was currently being used and use that in an exercise to determine what we as a group now think might be of interest to us to change. So that's one of the reasons that I think that we should at least look at this and hear it.
Okay. Well, we don't need a motion. We don't need an official action, as I understand it. So I think we have a consensus. So,
I think what our attorney was going to say is it would be good to have a motion to identify direction to
you'd like a
staff.
motion? Okay. All right, we do want a motion. This is for direction to staff. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that staff proceed discussion with St. John's Water Management District on the potential acquisition of the proposed properties
And bring it back.
and bring it back to us for review. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Direction to staff clear. Thank you. Last item of business. Okay.
Could I
With
ask?
that, any other further discussion?
Just want to circle back because Mr. Gamble had a great point about the listening sessions and counting against. I think what we're going to ask is the council to basically have those listening sessions not count against the committee's inability. If you're unable to attend physically, those would not count against your 2 missed meetings before your seat would be vacated. So it's a great point. And thank you for catching that. So I think that's how we're going to try and remedy that. Yes, sir. So what I'm saying is we're going to ask the county council to make that not be counted against you. Is that too many double negatives? It won't be counted against you is what we're going to ask the council to do. Okay? Sorry, Madam Chair.
All right.
One other question. Can we get a list, or as soon as we know what our meeting schedules will be for the rest of the year, can we get something to kind of get on at least on my calendar, so I don't mess up?
Yes, sir.
down the road?
I'm sure we'll be putting that list together.
Yes, I'm waiting on a few more confirmations for dates in June and July, but I will have that to you as soon as possible.
Are the listening sessions going to be recorded?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. I believe they are.
Okay, so anyone that misses could obviously watch.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
I got one question for staff. Can we go paperless? Is it possible to not get a folder but a bunch of PDFs?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And we can do it by preference. If some people prefer paper, just let Sarah know your preference and we'll provide it
Yeah,
that
I
way.
just don't have room to stack stuff. So. Sarah, I'd like paperless, please.
Okay. Wanda?
Just a question regarding the listening sessions. I know I voted for things in the past, and then after the fact, they seem to have been changed to such an extent that I didn't recognize what I voted for. So my question here is, with these listening sessions, how much leeway should we have in terms of changing the program as it exists today?
Again, staff's main focus is the procedures and criteria. All the things that we went over today were adopted over the time of the previous Volusia Forever program. So what we're trying to do is basically focus on are those 18 criteria what you want? If you want changes to those, identify what those changes. If we have currently, you have to meet 10 of the 18, would you prefer another number for that? We've got those 3 enhancement criteria. Do you feel those are appropriate? Those are the things that we're focusing on. We're not looking at any of the ballot language that's talked about what the purpose and the goal of the program is going to be. So those discussions about acquisitions of conservation lands for water quality, agriculture, et cetera, were included in the ballot language. None of that is up for discussion.
So use of the properties for the public is not up for discussion. So if somebody comes in, they'd like public hunting or something like that on a property, no, we don't talk about that. We're in something else.
Again,
okay? I want that real clear that we're not talking about how we use the properties, just why we're getting.
The primary purpose, again, is conservation and protection of natural resources and enhancement of water quality and other resources. And we've also identified in there now with this newer version, the protection of agriculture as well. So there's some, again, we're not going to deviate from what the ballot language said. All we're talking about is the criteria that you as the committee will be utilizing in helping setting the priority and getting the process through so that that way we're updating it for Volusia Forever 2.0.
Are you able to tell us the how you foresee these listening sessions going as far as the staff for your presenting?
As Ginger represented, we're going to be putting together basically a 10-minute video. The reason why we're doing the video is, one, we want to get it out in advance of the listening session so that the public can hear what's going to be said, and we have a consistent language through all 5 listening sessions. As soon as that's done, this podium, whatever podium may be open, is open for the public to come in and make comments. We will be also offering the opportunity for folks who are joining virtually to provide comments in advance. We will also be able to provide the opportunity for folks to send in via email or snail mail their comments and recommendations. The main goal is not for you all to hear us, is to hear the public. And Tim was a veteran of the previous time we went through some of these things, and basically that was the same format we had before. All righty.
Okay, if there's no further questions, Tim? Okay.
It's just that one thing. So, I think there's might be a concern that from what I heard from Wanda is that some of the language that is proposed or brought up in the listening sessions, that it gets morphed into something that wasn't really intended, So what staff's job will be is to put those comments together. And then you as an advisory committee make recommendations on what you want the program to look like. And then Russ puts it in a resolution after it goes through council, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're not looking to drive that train. We're looking to give you the information and you drive that train.
Yeah, my concern is just that I don't want the program to morph into something that the public isn't expecting, because we had a very successful program and I want to ensure that the program is successful going forward. And like I said, I've had in the past where I voted for something and then the enactment of it was completely different than what I had thought it was going to be. And I just want to make sure that doesn't happen here.
Okay.
Madam Chair, real quick, in keeping with sunshine, just wanted to make sure if you want to see there's any public comment that anybody wanted to give at this point.
Okay. Is there public comment?
Oh, come on, Doug.
Oh, I couldn't resist.
Doug Weaver, former assistant county attorney. Couldn't tell you how many times I've given these kind of lectures. Former director of land acquisition management, former first staff director of the House Agriculture Committee, Florida House of Representatives. I say that, excuse me, because I've been around so long now that I can take you to my office on the second floor of the historic Capitol, where it used to be. So I've been around long enough that my office is in a museum. Now, not everybody can say that. So welcome to you all. It looks like your strength will be a variety of backgrounds. And I think it's a terrific committee. I'll be around. I'm not looking for employment. I'd like to see a good relaunch. It looks like we've got an excellent foundation to have a very good relaunch of this program. And as I've told people, the success, in my judgment, was that we had great support from the public, great support from the county council, great support from this committee and the staff. Believe it or not, one time in government, we seemed to operate on all 8 cylinders. Okay, and you can do that again. I have no doubt you can do that again. I'm available. I'll be around. I would like to see a good relaunch, like I said, but if you have any questions, I'll offer a few comments from time to time. I would urge you, as I did as director, I individually took out committee members on these lands because it's virtually impossible for you to understand the scope and scale of this land management challenge that we have without going out on these lands, whether as a group or individually. I'd take anybody. When I retired, the county council says I'm allowed to go on these lands for life. So, you know, if the staff's too busy, I'll volunteer to take any of you individually, give you an idea of the scope and scale of this land management responsibility. So, thank you.
It's a generous offer, Doug. Thank you so much. And it says a lot about the importance of this program that people stay passionate. After 20 years, we still care deeply. Unless there's any further discussion, comment?
Hey, I do have one thing. Everybody keeps talking about this program being, this is the second term for 20 years, and that's not true because we had land buying back in the 80s. And actually we're really on 3.0, not 2.0. And it was because I know at that time back then I was on Orange City Council, and someone mentioned earlier about buying scrub land. And we bought some scrub land there in Orange City, and we caught a lot of grief for it because it wasn't in the corridor and it didn't fit. But today it's a phenomenal piece of property with parks and ball fields and scrub jay habitat and all kinds. So that's just, this is the third iteration, not the second.
Absolutely correct. Any other comments? Thank you all. We are adjourned.